A House Divided: How Confederate Pride Continues to Negatively Influence the Identity of the American South, by Group 3, Donovan Davis, Shane Reese, and Devin Weigel. Modern society has deviated from the idea that the Confederacy and the history of the South was a large stain on American history and has begun, in some extreme cases, to even celebrate that which the Confederacy stood for. There are some who would seek to romanticize the Confederacy and what they stood for as an act of Southern pride, and identify themselves firstly as Confederates and secondly as Americans. This attitude in a modern-day society shows that those who believe this are not taking into consideration the repercussions this has had on our nation and does not properly represent the South it is today. Our thesis is the glorification of Confederate symbols lasting into modern times has not only hindered equality in the nation, but has also grossly overlooked the meaning behind these symbols. A quick Google search of Southern pride will show prompt thousands of results and examples of what it means to have quote-unquote Southern pride. But where do we draw the line between Southern pride and romanticism of the Confederacy? The main argument for Southern pride stems from the argument of pride in the heritage of the Southern people and their upbringing. How did this lead to pride in a symbol of something that once drove the entire nation to war and to the brink of destruction of the United States of America? Pride, like many beliefs, is inherent to nature. Pride in our work, accomplishments, and even pride in those who laid the foundation of the United States for the future of its people, even if they would never see what the country could one day become. Regardless of the difference of beliefs, the Confederacy did want what they believed was best for its people at the time. The heritage of belief in a future of the nation is something that the South should be proud of. However, the Confederacy also stood for slavery, the beliefs that whites are inheritor of God's power, and as Alexander Stephens put it, that the Negro is not equal to the white man. This is where the line should be drawn between Southern pride and the Confederate pride, and where some extremists in modern society refuse to differentiate. Much of what makes up Confederate pride comes from romanticism of the Civil War. Southerners claimed that the war was about Southern planters standing up to Northern oppressors and that the Union was violating states' rights. They also find pride in smaller groups of Americans rebelling against an overwhelming force. They indulge in a kind of underdog story. While the Union did technically infringe upon states' rights, they were the rights to own slaves, a system that was not only barbaric and immoral, but was also detrimental to the economy. To put it simply, the main goal of the Confederacy was to secede from the Union so that they could continue the institution of slavery. The North wanted an end to slavery. It was immoral and made the United States look bad in the eyes of the world, as well as being economically obsolete. Northerners understood that mechanization was the future of both the manufacturing of goods and agriculture. They knew that having an unpaid workforce made it difficult for economic growth and impossible for growth as a united nation if half of its population is being oppressed. If the slaves were free, they could be paid for their work, spend their money, and start their own business, thus growing the economy. So when Americans claim that their family fought in the Confederacy and were hard-working farmers who stood up against tyrants, in reality, they only fought to keep the wealthy in power. When it came to the working class, the war brought nothing but misery. During the Civil War, white Southerners, whether they were rich or poor, believed in white supremacy, so much so that they were willing to die for it. Modern Confederate supporters will advocate this by saying that the Confederate flag represents Southern culture and heritage, when in reality what it represents is a dark and violent time in our history. As the war was winding down, the Confederacy would run out of food, money, and suffer from civil unrest. During the short time that the Confederacy existed, it was incapable of sustaining itself. So why do people still feel the insatiable pride or nostalgia for it when there are so many other things about Southern culture to be proud of? The American South has much to do to be proud of that doesn't have anything to do with the Confederacy, but it does have everything to do with its African American influence. It's the birthplace of blues, jazz, and by extension rock and roll, a large portion of American food culture, as well as some of the greatest writers in the world such as Mark Twain, William Faulkner, and Harper Lee. The remembrance of our past and heritage define who we are today, but should not define what we take pride in. Pride should stem from the remembrance of those before us, while realizing their flawed beliefs. Let us not glorify the mistakes of our fathers. but instead learn from those mistakes so that we may better society as it is today.